Greetings, metaphysicians. This is episode 164, Mortal, Immortal. And I have never felt more mortal than I have in the last week. So we're discussing what that is, what is mortality, but also how are we immortal, because we're both. Stay tuned and enjoy the episode.
You're listening to Let's Get Metaphysical. This podcast explores the spiritual and metaphysical world through the experiences and opinions of the host and those interviewed. It should not necessarily be seen as direct endorsement or personal advice to our listeners. We encourage you to use your own discernment, judgment, and intuition regarding anything you learn from this show.
Let's get meta.
Welcome to the Let's Get Metaphysical podcast. I am your host, Renata Maniaci, here to remind you that you are a spiritual being having a temporary human experience here on lovely planet Earth. Make the most of it. This is season 7, Heaven on Earth, and this is episode 164, Mortal, Immortal. Let's just go right into it, shall we? Let's get meta. Masters and angels, I request your presence, guidance, and support through this episode. Please help these words to be useful to all listeners on their evolutionary journey. Let me know the truth, speak the truth, become the truth, and be the truth. And please let this episode reach whoever needs to hear it. Thank you with gratitude and full faith. Bless creation. So, Mortal Immortal was an episode that came in a while ago, but it just wasn't time to do it yet, and I wasn't sure why. I have been thinking about this topic. I think I mentioned an episode or two ago that I've been reading more fantasy these last few months, and there's all these recurring themes in like any fantasy series. It seems that there's always a divide between the mortal humans and the something else, whatever it is. But it always seems like that other thing, whatever they are, whatever race, whatever anything, that it's better, more special, more powers, more abilities, all the things, whether or not they're actually immortal. But it wasn't time until now, and I think I know why. I think that it is potentially because I have never felt more mortal than I do right now. In fact, I can't remember a time that I felt more mortal than the last 7 days. I've been sick. I have been traveling. I'm in Tasmania while I'm recording this in a hotel that sounds like there are heaps of children running up and down the hallways. And I've been sick for the last week. And I can't remember the last time I've been sick this long, nor when I was traveling. I always rather thought that I had this protection around me while I traveled that prevented me from getting sick. And I think that I do most of the time, but for whatever reason, this is definitely my karma. I've done all the usual things, including used all the tools from my spiritual community and all the Western and Eastern and anything that I could think of. And that's a pretty extensive list of things, but this is just, it's like almost like every time I do something to try to be healthy, another symptom will pop up and say, no, 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 this is for you now. Just surrender into it. Relax into the sickness. Enjoy it. Hence, how I've never felt more mortal than I do right now. And I suppose that it's the perfect time to have an episode called Mortal Immortal. And perhaps aside from the sore throat and the coughing and the congestion and the not being able to breathe and everything else, I also plugged up one of my ears while we were landing here in Tasmania. And that was 7 days ago, and it still has not cleared. So I have only had use of one ear, and it is very weird. If you guys have ever had a plugged ear for a long period of time, I never have. This is new to me. It's really uncomfortable, and it's really weird to hear yourself talk and to feel yourself talk. And I think that's part of the reason why I've been holding off on recording this episode, even though I'm pushing the limit here and have needed to record it. But it's just so weird to talk and to not hear the way that I'm used to hearing. So this is me whining about my mortal state right now. And I think I am rather a baby about being sick because I really don't get sick often. So I don't think I'm good at it yet. Hopefully getting better through this week. I have surrendered to it the last few days. But why am I talking about all of this? We are these mortal beings right now in this lifetime with these bodies, these mortal bodies that get sick and ill and are susceptible to all kinds of things, diseases, injuries, pain, wear and tear, pleasure as well, but that's not really an issue. So I feel like we focus on the things that make us more mortal. We need to sleep, we need to eat, we need to drink, we have other needs we need to take care of. And that's mostly tied to this body. That's mostly tied to being mortal, having a material, whatever, I've used the words suit or costume or vehicle. You know, this body, in part, is what makes us mortal in this lifetime. And it's easy to forget that if you're feeling great. It's easy to forget how fragile we are in these bodies and how easily things can be swayed for you to not feel great. And to go back to what I kind of brought up a few moments ago is that there's this trope in content, whether it is books or movies, TV shows, any kind of story. It comes up in stories, in legends, in myths, in history even. But the trope is there's mortals, which are usually just human beings, mortals who are capable of dying, which I guess is the distinguishing factor of a mortal versus an immortal, right? Mortal means you can die or have some kind of death. And for our cases, we're talking about a physical, bodily death. That's what makes us mortal, right? But this trope is mortal versus something other than mortal. And it's not like all the content always says immortal. But inevitably, whether it is a superhero or a supervillain or aliens or wizards and witches, gods, goddesses, fae, fairies, elves, vampires, werewolves, something that's, in other words, a part animal, or you can transform into something else. In the Harry Potter world, you would call this an animagus, or animagus, and like something that you can transform into that makes you different or other than purely mortal, right? And the list goes on. This is just a hastily put together list of what I've come across in various content options I've been thinking about. But it's like mortal and human versus like all of that other stuff. And it's so frequent to run into this especially in fantasy and fiction, but even I just feel like in any of our stories, many of our stories surround this trope, this theme of human mortal versus something more. And oftentimes, though, that something more is immortal or incapable of a physical bodily death, or it's really, really, really much more difficult for that being, whatever it is, to have a physical bodily death. And I think we're fascinated by this for obvious reasons. I think there are, of course, people who recognize that we are both. We're mortal in this human body and we're immortal through our souls. And I think there are people on the planet who understand that, many people on the planet who understand that. And that's maybe why it comes through so often in our stories and our content and everything else. But I think it's also just this pervasive part of our subconscious and unconscious awareness in these bodies. And that's why we can kind of say superhuman tropes, so something above human, right? Super meaning above, come out so often in all of these different ways, in all of these different places. It's like we want something more. We want to be something more. We want to believe that there's something more. We want to have other abilities. We want to have super strength or long life or magic that we can do. We want these other things. Maybe we want them. Maybe we have had them before. And it's a memory that's coming to the surface through storytellers and artists and screenwriters and anything else. Memory, a want, a desire, a yearning. And maybe on some level, what's shining through in all of these tropes, in all of these stories where there's mortal humans and other, greater, maybe it's referencing the fact that there is part of all of us that is immortal. And it's talked about in some places more than others, in some spiritual circles more than others, in some religions more than others, and in some places it's not talked about at all. It's just assumed or believed that this is all we have, this body, and once it's done, and that's it. We're mortal. The body dies, we're done. But I can't help but wonder that if this trope that just never goes away and keeps being taken further and further and elaborated on in more and more stories, in part it's because we are that. There's some piece of us that is immortal. That's our soul. And in the next episode, I'm going to go into what is a soul. Not that I have the definitive answer for that, but we're going to discuss that in more depth. But this seeking, this fascination, this love of stories where we are more than mere mortals. And that phrase, mere mortals, like that in itself is kind of a trope in itself, right? Like we hear that in stories and movies and TV shows and and offhandedly in our commentary, in our humor, mere mortals. Mere mortals. It's always that phrase, it just denotes that we're less than, right? That something else is greater than. And so this journey that we take is of the immortal part of ourselves choosing on some level to come in to a mortal capsule, a mortal vehicle, if you will, a mortal body. And thus we are both. We become both. We're experiencing both right now. Although when one is sick, like me, or in pain, or doing any number of things, having any number of experiences in our physical forms, it can become oh so very obvious and glaring just how mortal we are. And we're so tapped into that. We're so, I think, so much more connected with our mortality than our immortality some of the time, much of the time. And it's easy to talk about what parts of ourselves are mortal. I just named a whole bunch, but just anything even that we do or make, it's like it has a time limit, right? You're going on a hike, you're seeing beautiful sights. It has a time limit. You're meeting with a friend, you have dinner, it has a time limit. It's going to end. You're a runner and you've been running your whole life, and eventually you have to run shorter and shorter distances because of the wear and tear on your body. That will come to an end. Your running will come to an end at some point. Anything that you can think of, any possession you might have, any place you might want to travel, any activity you want to do, it comes to an end. And I think that is almost the definition of what it is to be mortal and mortality, is that it's something that ends eventually. So what is it that defines immortality? If it's the opposite, it means something that does not end. What makes something immortal or someone immortal? Even in our stories, even in our movies and our books and our TV shows and whatever, what makes those beings, or I guess in some cases objects, immortal? They aren't bound by time in the way that we are. These bodies, these mortal bodies, they age. And how many stories are about that, trying to stop aging, trying to exit the cycle that makes us grow older. There's so many series and stories about beings that are immortal, and I think that's because we wish that we were, or that we know that on some level we are, but can't tap into that in this realm, in this dimension, on this planet. Maybe we know that living like that, or as, a young being on some level, or appearing young, even if you're very, very old, not aging, not getting sick, not having illness, not having the normal wear and tear that one experiences having a mortal human body. We know on some level that we don't have that every lifetime, or even in this part of us that is our soul, that piece of us is in fact immortal and unchanging, and time doesn't wear on it. Time doesn't take away from it. Time doesn't wrinkle it. Time only makes it stronger and adds to it. And I think that is one of the differences is with mortals and mortality, time takes away, and with immortality, time giveth. That's just a thought. So what are the parts of us? Are there parts of us even that are immortal besides our soul, or what is in a soul? And this is, again, what I'm going to go into in the next episode a bit, but to just give a phrase that I heard my teacher say recently, a soul is a collection of experiences. That's one thing he said. And I love that idea because it's a really simple way to understand what a soul, what one aspect or one way of looking at or one perspective of a soul might be. A collection of experiences. And in these bodies, in this mortality, we have so many photos on our phone, and we have these maybe journals of experiences that we've lived in this lifetime, and we have ways of looking back, physical ways of looking back to see what we've physically experienced in this lifetime, right? But when we pass, when the body is done, when our mortality is come up, we don't have those things anymore. We don't have the photo album or the journals or the scrapbooks or the anything. How do we know that we experienced this lifetime? And that is through the immortal part of us. It's in our souls. Our souls are said to have all of our experiences, every experience we've ever had, imprinted upon it in a way that we can't really even fathom in these bodies because we haven't experienced that. Rarely have we experienced being able to go back and relive something so fully with the smells and the feelings and the tastes and the emotions and the sights and everything else, the sounds. Rarely have we been able to do that in these mortal bodies. But it doesn't mean that we don't have that all being recorded somewhere that is rather inaccessible to us for the most part when we are in these bodies. Rather inaccessible to us, even if we would want to relive or revisit or re-examine or have a relook at something so that we could have maybe a new perspective. And that sometimes happens, that sometimes comes through, that sometimes peeks in, and we do have the new awareness, the new perspective, the guidance that came in, the thing that you just realized from something that happened 24 years ago. But it's not so easy. It's not like being able to sift through your photos on your phone and go to certain years and go to certain months and go to certain days. Like, we have that and other things like that at our disposal in these physical forms, in our phones and our X, Y's, and Z's, and who knows what's coming. But to be able to tap into your immortal part, the part of you that's immortal, that has experienced all of these things that you can't have any conscious memory of or very few conscious memories of for maybe thousands, if not millions of lifetimes, it's mind-blowing and it's difficult to understand, if not impossible to understand, that we are both. And I guess that's what I'm getting at here with this episode, is just bringing to attention these various ways that this truth comes up in our culture, comes up in our content in all these different ways, whether it's through abilities or through being able to not age in these stories, or being able to have abilities and transform yourself and have power that you never knew that you had. All of that kind of theme, all of those themes, all of these tropes, they come through for a reason. And I think they come through because we are that on some level. On some level, we are both. We have both. We are both mortal and immortal. We're mortal immortals. For this moment in time, that's what we are. And even though we usually only remember the mortal part when we're in peril somehow, when we're sick, when we're in danger, when we're in pain or getting injured or reminded in some way that we are mortal, we usually don't necessarily think about that all the time. I don't think in most people's day-to-day we are conscious and remember, oh yeah, we're mortal, we're mortal, we're mortal. Not like that, but like we do that when our being, when our bodies are in peril, typically is when we remember. But when do we remember that we're immortal? And I kind of wanted to end on that thought of when I remember that there's a part of me that's immortal, it's usually when I am somehow communing with the divine. And that can be through meditation. That can be through intentional communication with my angels and guides, or unintentionally spontaneous spiritual experiences that I've had throughout my life. But those are the moments, those are the examples of the moments: meditation, intentional communication with the divine, and just unintentional, spontaneous spiritual-like experiences. Those are the moments that a little piece of me remembers, oh yeah, there's something more than this. I'm more than this mortal body. There's a piece of me that goes on. There's a piece of me that has everything recorded that I've ever experienced. There's a piece of me that is immortal. And so I guess we can be on the lookout for that and just remember that we're both. And how precious it is, truly, to be in a body, even though all these things are happening in the world right now. And what a start to the year it's been. Oh my goodness. I don't even have to name things. People listening know what I'm talking about, but it's been kind of a bumpy start. But it's still an honor and a pleasure to be here, to be mortal. And it's easy to forget that, especially when you're sick for 7 days, when you're supposed to be on your vacation, having fun, and you've just been in bed most of the time trying to make it through. So I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you, as always, for listening. Stay positive, stay safe, and stay meta.
The Let's Get Metaphysical podcast is an Up and Awaken production and is produced and hosted by Renata Maniaci. Our intention is to raise the vibration of the planet by sharing, validating, and normalizing spiritual and metaphysical experiences. The Let's Get Meta podcast is inspired by angels and supported by angels. If you would like to be an angel donor to the podcast, visit patreon.com/letsgetmeta. Thank you for listening. Stay meta.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.
Let's get meta.
Metaphysical.